My name is Adam Blackwell, the Vice President, International Development Services Group. On behalf of the team at the Global Terrorism Trends and Analysis Center, I will be moderating this session titled The Psychology of Radicalization. This is a continuation of a series of talks by eminent people in the field of terrorism. The views expressed are those of the presenter. We are very fortunate to have with us today Dr. Arie Kruglanski, who is the Distinguished University Professor of Psychology at the University of Maryland. He has received too many awards to mention them all here, but I do see that we have something in common, being a resident fellow of the Rockefeller Foundation Center in Bellagio, Italy. He has served as an editor for the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Attitudes and Social Cognition, as editor of the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, and as an associate editor of the American Psychologist. He has also served as president of the Society for the Study of Motivation. His interests have been in the domain of human judgment and decision-making. His work has been disseminated in over 500 articles, chapters, and books, and has been continuously supported by a variety of grants from prestigious organizations. He has been a member of several NAS panels on the social and behavioral aspects of terrorism, and was co-founder and co-director at the National Center for the Study of Terrorism and the Response to Terrorism, START. He was the lead PI on the Minerva Grant from the Office of Naval Research, leading a team of interdisciplinary investigators on the motivational, social, and ideological determinants of radicalization, and is presently the lead PI on another Minerva Grant studying Syrian refugees' potential for radicalization, and on another Minerva Grant on the social consequences of climate change. Dr. Kruglanski will speak for roughly 20 minutes, and we then have 20 minutes for discussion. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom. Arie, thanks for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'm very pleased to be here with you today and to share with you some ideas and research findings, if time allows, on the topic of radicalization. Radicalization that progresses to violent extremism is a top item on the world agenda, and it is a top threat to global security and stability. Some call it one of the defining issues of the 21st century. Even though America announced a global war on terror almost a quarter century ago, terrorist employing movements and organizations are alive and well in various parts of the world. The Taliban is back in Afghanistan. The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is governing Syria. The Houthis are entrenched in Yemen. Boko Haram is active in Nigeria. Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Hamas in Gaza. Hezbollah in Lebanon. White supremacist movements in the various Western countries, including our own US of A. Anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic violence is on the rise worldwide. So, in short, violent extremism is rampant, and in fact, constitutes one of the great challenges that humanity is currently facing. How are we to understand the nature of this global threat? How can we respond to the challenge that it poses? And today I'd like to offer you a psychological perspective on this issue that I believe to be of crucial importance. And let me tell you why. Many political phenomena that shape history have a root in human psychology. And this is the case also with radicalization. Macro level factors like poverty, political oppression, poor education may contribute to radicalization in some cases, and they can matter less or not at all in other cases. Why? Because they do so only to the extent that they activate the relevant psychological mechanisms. Most importantly, therefore, it's the accurate understanding of those mechanisms that may ultimately guide effective programs and interventions aimed at counter-radicalization and de-radicalization. Over the last 2 decades or so, our team at the University of Maryland has carried out extensive field research with terrorists and others at the risk of radicalization. And on the basis of these data, we developed a theory that addresses the psychology behind radicalization. This theory integrates important prior insights by social scientists of various disciplines and show how they work together to produce violent extremism. Specifically, we suggest that violent extremism results from a conjunction of three factors: people's psychological needs, compelling narratives about how those needs can be satisfied, and social networks that validate those narratives. And therefore, we speak here of the 3N model of radicalization: needs, narratives, and networks. Let me unpack these three parameters to you. First of all, the need. Violent extremism is carried out by individuals. It's the individual, after all, who decides to wear a suicide belt, pick up a weapon, or travel thousands of miles to risk their life and limb for some cause. So the big question is, why do they do it? What is their motivation? And this has been an overriding issue for terrorism researchers. And they came up with a list of motives: perks of paradise, vengeance, admiration of the leader, even feminism, desire to show that women too matter, the women too can do it. Now, all of these are valid descriptions of specific cases, but our research has shown that the underlying factor in all these instances is the fundamental human need to matter and have significance, to be respected by others and by oneself as well. Take vengeance, for example. Vengeance comes in response to sin loss of significance, humiliation, injustice, disempowerment, exclusion. In avenging that humiliation, one reasserts one's power and hence one's significance. Or take the perks of paradise. True, they are sweet in and of themselves, but above all, they have a symbolic value. They represent one's great achievement for which one wins the prize in celebration of that achievement. Now, like with any other human motive, this quest for significance and for respect needs to be activated in order for it to affect behavior. No one quests for significance 24/7. So how is this quest for significance activated? It's activated by any event that lends significance special value. This could be a loss of significance, either due to personal failure or mishaps, or an insult to one's social identity, discrimination against your group, your ethnicity, your religion. Such collective insights offers an opportunity of gaining great significance and becoming a celebrity, a hero, or even a martyr in the eyes of one's group. Now, gaining great significance is a highly motivated factor in itself, and not only as a way to counteract an insult or a failure. Nationalism, the dream of glory for one's nation, promises immense significance to members of a nation. Often such glory has to do with the size of the country and its strength in the international pecking order. It's exactly such a glory that motivates the various military conquests throughout history, from Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Hitler, and others, and most recently, Putin, of course. Let me talk now a bit about the narrative. The need for significance and mattering is fundamental and universal. As the late humanist Jean Vanier remarked, all of us have a secret desire to be seen as saints, heroes, and martyrs. Indeed, the desire for significance, for mattering, for respect is one of the most important human needs. The infant vies for attention because otherwise it will not survive. Adult humans too vie for significance and respect. No one wants to feel humiliated and disrespected. But while the need for significance is universal and fixed, the roads for significance are different and wholly dependent on the cultural narrative that one embraces. This is the second element in our 3N triumvirate. And such narrative tells individuals, it's a guidepost, tells individuals how significance can be attained. Basically, significance can be attained by living up or representing one's group values. Scott Atran called it sacred values, but it can be any value that a group cherishes. And the narrative tells you what you need to do in order to live up to the group value. In the case of the violence justifying narrative, you're urged to perpetrate violence, take risks, and make sacrifices for the glory of God, king, or country. In short, the radicalizing narrative ties violence to the attainment of significance. Tightly connected to the narrative element is the network element, the in-group that subscribes to the narrative. Why networks? The social network has two cardinal functions. First, it validates the narrative, and in so doing, it turns into a shared reality for the group. Secondly, it dispenses rewards in the form of respect and admiration for people who represent and implement the narrative in what they do, in their actions. Why is the network important? Because as social being, other people define for us what is real. The network has what we call epistemic authority, and the world view that we embrace is grounded in a shared reality that our cultural reference group is defining for us. What kind of network? The network can be a proximal, face-to-face interacting group of people, what Mark Sageman called a bunch of guys. They get together and incite each other to action. But it could also be a more remote, more distal group that communicates online. It can even be an assumed group or even an imagined group. For instance, an individual may know, based on his or her prior knowledge, that their community would approve of him ramming or her ramming a truck into out-group members, or of them picking up a knife, an axe, and slaughtering an out-group member. The more widely shared is a given narrative in one society, the lesser is the need for a face-to-face, tightly cohesive group that validates the narrative, because one knows that the community is supportive of one's actions. One doesn't need to be told. Face-to-face affirmation of the narrative is particularly important for deviant groups, the Bader-Meinhof, the Brigade Rosse, that are deviant, that stand out from the mainstream of their societies. And also, very importantly these days, communications with like-minded others online partially supplant the need for face-to-face contact. The network, after all, can also be a whole nation or a majority within a nation that supports a given narrative, a given ideology. Such majority can gain political power and determine policy, both domestic and foreign. In India, for example, Narendra Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP, adopts the Hindutva ideology from the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh RSS group that was formerly accused of terrorism and political violence. National Socialists assumed power in Germany and the fascists in Italy in the 1920s and the 30s, and this swept whole nations in their radical ideology and create widely shared realities, causing a normalization of extremism. How does the 3N model of radicalization relate to alternative conceptions that have been proposed over the years? And what is new about it anyway? What is new about it that we integrate prior approaches into a unified functional model that explains how radicalization happens. For instance, Ted Gurr a colleague of mine at Maryland University, in his renowned 1970 work entitled How Men Rebel, talked about relative deprivation as the root cause of radicalization. And this, of course, touches on the need element of our model. Relative deprivation suggests that your group was treated unfairly, it was slighted, it was divested of significance. But relative deprivation doesn't cover all cases of significance loss. For example, a significance loss that is occasioned by personal mishaps and failing, and these too should activate the quest for significance, and we have evidence that it does. Furthermore, Gur's analysis does not give enough weight to elements of narrative and the network that explains why some cases of relative deprivation may lead to rebellion and other cases may not. Some analyses, for example, Scott Atran's work, emphasize the important notion of sacred values. But the question is, why would sacred values lead to extremism? The missing link here is individuals' need for significance. That is essential, and to social network that affirms the link between extreme actions and the attainment of significance. Serving sacred values is a means to significance, but the underlying motivation is the quest for significance. So our analysis complements also Mark Seligman's seminal early analysis of terrorist network, but adding the network element to the narrative and the elements that together work in order to promote and produce radicalization. Other more macro analyses have stressed poverty, oppression, or poor education, and these, of course, touch on the need element of significance deprivation. If you're oppressed, if you're poor, if you're poorly educated, you feel insignificant. But as we know, neither poverty nor oppression nor poor education alone explain violent extremism, but in a combination with a narrative that stresses how your significance can be offset, and with a network that supports the narrative, poverty and oppression could be contributing factors to radicalization, so that all else being equal, people who are poor, oppressed, or otherwise downtrodden might be at greater risk of radicalization than ones who are wealthy, free, and happy. If the need and network factors are the essential element of radicalization, they also should be involved in de-radicalization. And we have research evidence to suggest that they are. From evidence that we obtained from people who left the extremist organizations, we know that often leaving extremists behind happens when individuals are exposed to a compelling narrative that denies that violence is the right means for significance. For example, the argument that Islam views the killings of innocents as sinful rather than heroic. Leaving extremists behind often happens through the network element, friendships or romantic relations with people in moderate, mainstream milieus. Severance of connection with an extremist network, returning to the embrace of one's moderate family, etc., have been shown to facilitate exit from the extremist organization and return to the mainstream. And finally, relinquishing extremism. Leaving extremists behind happens when other ways of fulfilling the quest for significance are activated. As a former member of ETA, Euskadita Askatasuna remarked in an interview with Fernando in Reinares, you say to yourself, shit, man, I better get myself a life because time is running out. It's a matter of being that much older. And in my case, specifically, of wanting to get married. You're going on 40 years old, you are going to get married next year, and you say to yourself, well, shit, man, I mean, at this stage of the game to go packing a piece, that would be a bit, because you just got to, well, we've all got to live a bit. I don't know how much more time I have. I wanted to share with you a piece of research we did on de-radicalization. So if you could tell me how much time I've got left, I'll decide whether to do it or skip to the conclusions.
About, I would say 5 minutes, Arie.
Okay, let's go for it then. This is a project we did on the radicalizing Tamil Tigers of Sri Lanka. They waged a 30-year secessionist campaign to create an independent Tamil state in Sri Lanka, recognized as a terrorist organization, employed violent and brutal tactics, high-profile assassination, suicide bombing. They invented the suicide belt, child abductions, use of civilians as human shields. They did it all, huge amount of devastation over 30 years. In 2009, more than close to 12,000 Tamil Tigers surrendered to the Sri Lankan military after being defeated in 2009. And the government of Sri Lanka launched an effort to rehabilitate them. They were placed into the radicalization facilities. It was my great stroke of luck to be introduced to the Secretary of Defense, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who then became later the president of Sri Lanka. This is myself with Tamil Tigers. They were exposed to a program that was adapted from other programs in Africa, Asia, Latin America. Program contained educational, vocational, psychological, spiritual, recreational, cultural, family, and community. And it was basically equipped to, aimed to equip detainees with new capabilities in order to facilitate their reintegration into society. From our standpoint, the need, they were paid respect and dignity. They were never called terrorists or detainees. They were referred to as beneficiaries. The narrative was the dialogue on the ineffectiveness of war and the importance of living together in peace, tolerance and coexistence, and the network, family rehabilitation, use of family, community reintegration, and so forth. Now, we had a sample of close to 500 beneficiaries that were exposed to a full treatment program, educational, vocational, the whole 9 yards. We were also very fortunate to have a control group of close to 100 that were received only minimal treatment at that point. They received the full treatment later. So we had a comparison over a year's time. And as you can see, the full treatment declined more. This is the lower graph, declined more and significantly so that the minimal treatment group. In addition, we found that rehabilitation attitudes toward the program at time 1 led to increased significance at time 2. They benefit from the program in terms of how they felt about their own dignity, and reduced extremism at time 3. What about long-term success? We compared them. First of all, the number of programs they participated was again positively related to significance and negatively related to extremism. But when we compared them, the LTTE, with members of the community, graduates of the program, to members of the community, they were significantly less extreme than members of the Tamil community that did not even participate in the terrorist organization. Finally, we found that those among the reintegrated members of the LTTE who still maintain contact with other previous comrades, or if they had a family or friends in the diaspora that was very supportive of the secession ideology, they were radicalized to a lesser extent than those who had no connections. So, in conclusion, I would like to suggest to you that individual psychology, this quest for dignity and significance, is important to understanding radicalization and de-radicalization. And such psychology is primarily determined by 3 factors: the needs, the narratives that tell you what means are there to satisfy those needs, and social networks that validate those narratives. Macro level factors are important because they affect masses of people. And the challenge is therefore to identify the factors that bridge between macro level policies of governments and others and micro factors, and leverage them in the interest of fighting violent extremism. Thank you very much.
Arie, thank you for a very compelling and very interesting tour d'horizon. I'm sure that we could have spoken for another 30 minutes, but I think that's given everybody, whetted everybody's appetite, and perhaps we can invite you back another time to go into this in a bit more detail. So just to remind everybody, please enter your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom. We hope to make this as dynamic a dialogue as possible. I already have a couple for you already. The first one is, what happens when de-radicalization when some extremist views become more mainstream?
In the same way as radicalization can happen, so can deradicalization, and so can re-radicalization. People who are re-exposed to violence justifying narrative and they are in a social milieu that supports that narrative will gravitate back to extremism. So nothing is forever. The human mind is very malleable. And the fact that somebody de-radicalized at point one, at time one, does not guarantee that they will continue being de-radicalized, because it all depends on the social context, their motivational state, and the narrative to which they are exposed.
The second question is, would like your views on the state of radicalization around the world today relative to when your work on it began. Is it more of a problem or less? If more, why, and how can we hope to reduce it?
It's very difficult to answer that question precisely. I do not think that we have less of radicalization. There has been a lot of turmoil in the world in the last several decades. You know, the globalization crisis that left masses of people feeling left behind, the migration crisis in Europe, the refugee crisis, the pandemic. All of these contributed to a great deal of uncertainty about people's dignity, people's significance, people's participation and recognition. And that rendered masses of people vulnerable to radicalizing narratives that identify somebody, some culprit who is responsible. It can be a conspiracy theory. It can be a populist ideology. Identified some culprit that is responsible and that needs to be met with violence, met with aggression, and that will ensure, that will guarantee your significance, your sense of dignity, and so forth. So that's why I think we see around the world a great deal of extremism, proliferation of conspiracy theories, all kinds of militancies springing up. How can we deal with it? By trying to create just societies in which people do not feel left behind, in which people feel that they matter. It's not something that terrorism experts can address or psychologists can address. It has to be met at the level of communities, at the level of societal institutions, at the level of the police, of the churches, of immigration policies. But that's basically what we need to strive to create, that elusive ideal of just societies.
Thank you, Arie. The next question is, well, it's more of a statement. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. And could you please recommend books for further reading on this and related topics? And this is maybe something we could send around in an email if you would prefer.
Yes, I would like to make a list of books and share them with you.
Okay. Please, folks, questions in the Q&A function. Arie, I have one for you. As I was listening to your articulation of the 3 Ns, I was struck by the challenge that we now have in GTAC of adding 11 new FTOs to our data collection and data processing, many of whom are either cartels or gangs. I would just like your views on how you think the 3 Ns differentiate between, a more, if I can use the word, traditional definition of a terrorist versus kind of the emerging definition, which includes gangs and cartels.
I think it's a question of the content of the narrative. Both gangs and cartels give people a great deal of significance through subscribing to a narrative of power, of masculinity, of violence as a proof of dignity for men, as compared to traditional terrorism that is embracing different values. The values can be pro-social, it could be for sovereignty over land, it could be for religion, it could be for social justice, it could be for the environment, it could be for social rights. So the contents of the ideology, the values that are being served by gangs as opposed to traditional terrorist organizations are different, but the psychological dynamic is the same. You identify a way of becoming dignified, becoming significant, and depending on the culture, the contents of those values may differ.
Thank you. The next question is why would someone choose to restore significance through terrorism rather than other activities that are less costly and dangerous?
That's a very good question. Violence has a primordial appeal in terms of significance. That's how little children resolve their conflicts. That's how conflicts are resolved in the animal world. Even sophisticated nations resort to violence or the potential of violence, having nuclear armaments, for example, being in this very exclusive club to guarantee their place in the international arena. So there is something about violence that is extremely significance bestowing. It's a primordial way of becoming dominant, becoming significant, becoming powerful, and therefore its appeal is very, very great. Also, attaining significance through alternative means is usually very gradual and arduous. It's a very long climb along the steps of a career, fraught with difficulties, fraught with obstacles, whereas to volunteer for a suicide mission, you obtain immediate significance. You become a celebrity overnight. So both for the immediacy of it and the magnitude of the significance that violence asserts, it has tremendous appeal. We have interviewed members of the Tamil Tigers who are now reintegrated into society. We talked with one person who was now employed as a translator, a peaceful kind of work, and who could support his family. And we asked him, how does he feel about being reintegrated? He says, I feel okay, but I felt much better as a fighter. So, there is something about violence, the glory, the military glory of violence, of courage, especially for men, that is extremely, extremely powerful.
We have another question here. I apologize to those making questions, but they're coming across to me in Zoom as anonymous, so I can't recognize the name. The next question is, the LTTE in Sri Lanka has been cited as an example of ethno-nationalist and separatist terrorism, and your 3N model has been effectively applied to that context. In light of current reports about ISIS-affiliated families in detention camps in northern Syria, where prison conditions are horrific, exacerbating radicalization, how might the 3N model be applied to address the risks of radicalization amongst these families?
Prisons can be places where de-radicalization occurs, but prisons can be also a place where radicalization is intensified, especially when people's conditions are very bad, when they are surrounded by like-minded individuals or committed to the ISIS ideology. The leaders emerge who are committed to that ideology, and they wield tremendous influence. We have seen it in Filipino prisons, where in the course of 2 years, the people became much more radicalized than they were before. So if you create situations in prison where everybody is together with the leaders, radicalization will thrive, especially when the conditions are very bad, when people feel deprived, when people feel enslaved, where people are deprived of contact with their families. So, you know, it's a very humiliated situation. Add to it like-minded, ideologically committed others and leaders, and this is going to be a petri dish for radicalization. Prisons can be at an environment for de-radicalization when people are separated from the group, separated from the ideology, separated from the leaders, and exposed to an alternative narrative, alternative ideology that they would find convincing. But I think just putting them in prison can intensify radicalization, and we have seen it happening time and time again.
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple more questions. So this is one I kind of like. If you had funds to implement just one program to reduce radicalization in the USA, what would that program look like?
I think that would be probably something to do with community involvement, including schools, including religious institutions, including the police, inducing psychological literacy and translating into actions within the community. What comes to mind is the Aarhus model in Denmark, where they have been successful in de-radicalizing and counter-radicalizing members of the community through concerted community effort. The police is trusted by the population, the schools, the churches, they all work together in order to root out and do whatever they can, including understanding the psychology of it, to root out radicalization. So it has to be, as I said, a whole community effort. It cannot be something very isolated and very specific.
So another good question here. Following the October 7th terror attacks, there have been numerous international reports on the potential impact on radicalization. Considering your 3N model, what recommendations would you offer to Western governments to mitigate the risk of further radicalization in this context?
I would recommend policies that I've written about it. I think, you know, to the extent that the violent option were taken off the table, which would mean defeat of Hamas, that would open a window for an alternative. And at that point, Israel should be compelled to offer concessions and to promote finally a constructive approach to the two-state solution. But I think that the first thing that needs to happen, and world government should understand that it has to happen, is to take the violent option from the table. Right now, Hamas is still victorious. Hamas is a terror organization that promoted violence, and to the extent that it's seen as successful, that would always be a preferred route of addressing the Israeli-Palestinian problem. So to the extent that Hamas exists and is in power, I think that the Palestinians would be reluctant to consider alternatives. Every time we have seen that the radicalization happened, whether it be in Egypt, the Al-Jihad and Gamma Islamiyah who radicalized, or Sri Lanka, the first thing that had to happen was that the violent option, the militant option, was taken off the table. So, you know, it has to be proven ineffectual. It has to be proven that it is something that brings only suffering and destruction rather and shame, actually, rather than honor and dignity. And after that, there should be an effort on part of the international community to compel Israel and the Palestinians to sit down and consider productive and constructive resolution of the conflict in terms of the only fair solution possible, which is, to my mind, a two-state solution.
Thank you. I have one more that came through the chat function. Can you talk a little bit about the internet culture and how people can be very segregated and siloed into forums full of grievances and not exposed to potential vectors of de-radicalization?
Well, I think that the social media and the internet contributed greatly to radicalization in two ways. One is the constant social comparison and social contact, which enhances and makes salient that quest for significance. You want to have more likes, you have to want to be more popular, more posts, more friends than other people, and that enhances this seeking of significance. The second factor is that you can always find like-minded others in echo chambers. No matter how extreme, how exorbitant your views are, you'll be able to find them on the internet. So if your views are deviant, violent, committed to cruelty, committed to atrocities, you will find like-minded others on the internet. The internet can also be presumably used in order to promote alternative ways of attaining significance through narratives that address that particular need, identifying ways of being dignified and having respect through pro-social means. That has not been attempted very much. Mostly of the attempts at deradicalization was to show the futility of the terrorist communications like ISIS, that ISIS is really not delivering on its promises and so forth. But we need to have alternatives. You cannot just say that, you know, one way is ineffectual without promoting an alternative. So those alternatives, those alternative narratives for significance that are pro-social, constructive, serving others, ideological, embracing sacred values, as Atran would put it, could be used on the internet in order to promote an alternative way to promote significance.
With that, Dr. Kruglanski, I think we will wrap up this session. I would like to thank all of those who've listened in. As you can see, we try and do these sessions in about 45 minutes. So if anybody out there is interested in being one of our future speakers, please let us know. We will gather a list of books from Dr. Kruglanski and we will send it around to the participants. Again, Arie, I would really like to thank you for a compelling and interesting presentation and your time. I know you've got many things on the go, so I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to our group. It was well appreciated.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.